get the audience. If you recall from last time I was talking about the intellectual atmosphere of the planet. Let me see if I can make it a bit more personal and local. I even asked you to picture the same way as the air around the planet of a kind of intellectual atmosphere. But it might perhaps make it seem a bit more localized. We have a man there, and there is like this, let's call it something else, is a thinking cloud. For a thoughtful man. But consider it. And again, I encourage you, at the least provocation, not to take this metaphorically. In fact, besides just calling it a thinking cloud, we could call it a cloud bank. Because it will work. I was going to use that in another way, but drawing from the wonderful world of meteorology, you know that there is such a thing as a cloud bank. But be that as it may, whichever way I use it, you can literally consider that there is a cloud. It covers the whole planet, but it makes it appear a bit more local. That wherever you are on this planet, there is, I almost said literally, there is a thinking cloud. And it does operate like a bank. But let me refresh you from last time, it also operates like the cloud or like the atmosphere, in that it is there, and as you breathe mentally, you extract from it. It is common, it is all-inclusive, it is all-invasive, and it is not personal to anyone on this planet. But to call it a cloud and then also a cloud bank, it operates like a bank. With one exception, no one has made any deposits. There is no such thing as a personal initial deposit. Now, as you go along, people do apparently redeposit that which they've withdrawn temporarily. But there is nothing in this thinking cloud that men have deposited. On that basis, you could look at the ordinary level of consciousness, which amounts to unattended consciousness, just your normal state. It is not really that men think, it is that thinking thinks. This cloud thinks. And going to tie this into two things we've talked about before, that one of them appeared to be an absolutely unanswerable question. And not only an unanswerable question, but one that if you considered it in a sincere manner, would almost give you a real bad headache. Because it's not just that I propose some unanswerable question, it is a totally functional, or the background to it is totally functional and goes on continually in you, and if you ask, how can this be, there is no answer. And not to hold you in suspense any longer, what I'm referring to is, what are you going to say next? And if you recall, every time I bring that up, if a person has any ability to interrupt the normal flow of their thinking, to suspend their normal state of consciousness, and actually be able to ask themselves, what am I going to say next? You've got no idea, and yet it doesn't stop you. That alone, if humanity was really ready for some other state of consciousness, which they're not, as you know, I'm not here preaching and hectoring people, but if they were, that one thing alone would make everybody fall down and have some kind of Buddha jitters. Or make them have a Jesus swoon. It would do something horrible to ordinary people if they could hear it and hold the idea just for 10, 15, 20 seconds. You'd have to do it more than once. But if they did, That is, remember how simple it is. If you ask somebody, do you know what you're talking about? Are you a sane, ordinary, conscious person? They go, yes. And you go, have you ever noticed that you don't know what you're going to say before you say it? And a person, if they really consider it a serious question, they'll go, and it goes nowhere. Because the best they could do is get a quick glimpse of the fact that, no, I don't. But that is almost self-destructive to the mind. But how is it? You know, if you recall, I've proposed it to you in several rhetorical fashions. How is it? Well, first off, what are you going to say next? And the truth is, no one knows. It's not a theory, but it's one of those great mystical truths in that it cannot be shown to an ordinary person. It cannot be proved. I cannot put it on some sort of paper or diagram it or come up with an equation and go, aha, look at this. Because you can show it to anybody and they go, aha, so what? And you go, you don't know what you're going to say next. They go, yeah, I do, or I couldn't say it. And you go, well, think right then. Did you actually know what you were going to say before you went, well, no, that's not true. Yes, I can. He went, well, yes. And there's nothing you can do with it. You can either see it or not see it, and that's it. After that, the second version of it would be to ask in a little more detail, at least rhetorically, then how is it you explain that the whole intellectual world, the civilized world of humanity, continues to put along at ever-increasing rates of complexity and speed, and we're running more and more in the world of the intellect, that without that we would not even be humans anymore. It's way past the point of Model Ts and the Industrial Revolution and just bio survival of the body. This is it. And people would go, yes, certainly. And you go, well, how can this be when we don't have anyone on this planet that knows what they're about to say next? It is unanswerable. Ordinary people won't even tolerate the question, but to someone sincerely trying to consider it, I haven't brought it up in a good while now, but you might as well face it. You cannot answer the question with any ordinary materials, with any ordinary ammunition. I have now in one cell foop. If I have not answered it, I'm about to. When you realize that there is this collective cloud, this common cloud of thinking. Now let's change it from me calling it a mental atmosphere. It's the same thing, but now let's consider this thinking cloud. It's everywhere on this planet. You cannot escape it if you think. It is already there. The cloud, it is thinking that thinks. That is not man who thinks. When you realize that, then the question is absolutely answerable. It is quite plain. That when thinking is doing the thinking, and that people, as they breathe, both literally and mentally, but as you breathe, you're continually with no attention to consciousness. It requires none. It interferes with it, if you have any. That you simply stand there, and as you breathe, both physically, that is, in the circulatory system, but you're breathing up here. It's what seems to be the little isolated bits of thinking. As you do that, all you're doing is withdrawing from the cloud bank of thinking. That being the case, it is totally understandable. There's no further mystery about it of how men can talk and not know what they're going to say next. It's not necessary. All you must do is make a temporary withdrawal. All you've got to do is be in an ordinary state of consciousness. And as long as you're there, you are continually, with every breath, you are withdrawing temporarily from this depository of every possible thing that you can think. It is already there. Including a denial of just what I said. And so you can tell somebody that and they go, well, that's a bunch of horse shit. Because that idea is already there. But that's not individual thinking. That's not original thinking. But you understand there is no way out after that. And not only of me pointing out that in one sense that was an unanswerable question, how about all of the unanswerable questions having to do with man? The main one being, or they all amount to one, is what is the nature of life? What is the nature of human existence? And no one, we're not any closer to answering it after 5,000 years. No closer. Why not? if you understand it this way, that everything that you can think at the unattended, that is the ordinary level of consciousness, everything you can think is already floating in that cloud. May I encourage you again, it's been a good 10 minutes, you do not have to take this metaphorically. Most of you are over 21 and freeholders, and you're not indebted to anyone, so just go right ahead. If you would care not to take this as being a metaphor, do so. To consider that the unanswerable question is, what are we doing here, or what's the nature of human existence, some version of that, and no one can answer it. Do you understand why no one can answer it? If all you can do is think at that unattended level, that is, all you're doing is making mechanical withdrawals, absolutely unknowing withdrawals, that you're not thinking, it's this cloud has got everything that people can think. Everything is already there. And all you do is you go, well, okay. Now you knew that was there. Well, all right, wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Let me get this clear what you're saying. You know that's there somewhere. Well, now wait a minute. Now, if you mean that metaphorically, maybe I'll consider it. You know that that was there. We haven't arrived at anything approaching individual, creative, original thought. And that's how you can think without knowing what you're going to think. That's how you can talk without knowing what you're going to say. Because you don't say it. You don't think it. The cloud does. The collective thinking that runs the mental level of man. Also, if you would care to, you do not have to take this as allegory either when I say that men do not think thinking things. On the surface, that must be an allegory, but you have my full permission to consider it further that it may not be. At the ordinary level, which is consciousness unattended, that you are not attempting to interfere, to suspend it, to interrupt it, to stop it. And it has nothing to do with intelligence. That's one of the things that you must, that I know is difficult to keep in mind even when you're not aware of it, that you can take a comment like that, and if you don't watch it, you take it as being a qualitative judgment having to do with the relative intelligence of people. That you go, well, some people think more than others. No. If they're alive and breathing, they think about the same amount. Well, think about it. How much can you think? Now, some of the popularity of some of the drugs, such as amphetamines, such as caffeine, it gives the illusion that you're thinking more. No. You're thinking faster. You're not thinking more. But it does give that illusion. Well, see, all of you are aware of it. Many people feel like that they cannot write anything, or if they're stuck, or they have to get in the morning, the attorney's working on a case, or a novelist or working on a book, is like, I need coffee. And I'm not talking about just some sort of physiological dependency. It gives mentally. All stimulants do, the illusion, people do not sit around and think about it, but it gives the illusion that they're thinking, they might say better. Well, what they mean is more. That I'm sitting there and I'm sort of blank in the morning. I can't get to starting chapter 5, or I got a paper I've got to write, or I've got to deliver a lecture tomorrow night, and it's like, get some coffee. Or push a little further, get some basis of amphetamines, and it stimulates the nervous system, and you feel it directly here. And that's what people do it for. They don't do it to make their heart beat faster. That's just kind of an irritating side effect sometimes. They want this to work better, to work more. It doesn't work more. It works faster. But people, and there is some usefulness in that. That's why I got stuck there for a second. Because you would normally think, an intelligent person, you would say, well, look at somebody over here that appears to be of limited education, limited sophistication. They've not left their little hometown here. They lived a pretty parochial life. And you would say, do you think that someone like that thinks less? And I don't mean they're stupid, but that just their actual thought processes, what they think, is in some way less than a person over here who, let's say, has a PhD in English or philosophy or science, and who actually works in the field, who is an academian themselves, or is a researcher, And your mind would just say, well, yes, no offense to either party, but the man over here who works for a living, that his profession is the mine, thinks more than this guy. No, no, no. That's not a theory. I know it sounds weird. Just try it yourself. Can you think more than you do now? The truth is, you think more than you're normally aware of. I tried to throw out a few hints. You can find them yourself. Your mind very constantly, very frequently, is doing 2 and 3 things at a time. But to think more than you do is not so. You can speed it up and give the illusion that you are thinking more or better. All it is the neural firing's running faster. Back to where we were, if anyone remembers. The question of what's the purpose of life? Or why do we have at least 1 or 2 questions that no one can answer? That there's some way they're transcendental, there's some way that takes offshoots, sins of the gods, or people who've entered some other realm, that they just appear to answer it, or they say they know. Why cannot humans answer it? If everything that a man can think at the ordinary unattended level, if it is there in that cloud that is covering this whole planet literally, and is covering everyone here literally and allegorically, if you still want the easy one, that everything you can possibly think is right there in that cloud. And it gets frightening when I say you don't have to take it metaphorically, when you tie this to what I pointed out, that how is it that you can talk and think and get through life and you've got no idea what you're about to say next? Just then. You mean, wait, you mean I didn't know? Did you know? No, that I didn't know. Well, I just said that, but how'd you say it? Well, how'd you do that? One easy way that response would say, well, all of life is scripted. And there's always been people either intentionally or unintentionally using that sort of thing, that the whole world's a stage and we're all but players mouthing the words of other men. And then the Southern Baptists say, well, predestination. You've had Greeks and you had Chinese writers thousands of years ago saying, well, this whole thing is some sort of puppet show. It's already been written. The whole script is there and all we're doing is walking through it. Notice the popularity of such views, and I don't mean that those who even wrote it or mused it understood it, but even as an interesting theory, even as cocktail chit-chat, notice the great popularity with which that has always been received. Not. People won't even go, so what are you going to do? But that was what they were sort of staggering around. That was sort of the seepage from what I'm pointing out that gets into some nervous systems here and there. Not enough for them to understand it, not enough for it to necessarily wreck their life, and certainly not enough seepage nor fertile soil in the rest of humanity for it to seep out and to have widespread acceptance or even interest. It just simply does not. But rather than look at that the whole thing is scripted from top to bottom, is consider, if you will, my description of this thinking cloud. That everything that you would normally think, this includes everybody from my person of limited education, limited experience, limited sophistication, limited travel, to a person who seems to operate in the mental realm for a profession. It does not matter. It doesn't matter if someone is thinking in the crudest of terms, speaking almost every other word as expletives, has just a worm's eye view of life, and then you have another person who has they believe some sort of cosmic vision. They try to consider all sides of arguments. They're a one-worlder. They're everything modern and hip and apparently sophisticated. It all comes from that cloud. And that's why no one can answer the unanswerable questions. That's why no one can say what they're going to say next. That's why no one can predict what they're going to think next. And why it does not matter one iota. Because you don't have to. All you have to do is be alive. The cloud thinks for you. I don't know what could be simpler. I mean, there you are. And look, you're thinking now. You're thinking about, you didn't hear this before, and so tonight you might go, well, this is something new to ponder. Yeah, I know, but it's not. Because there is nothing new to ponder, because anything you're going to ponder comes right out of the cloud. It would have to be, in some way, and this gets to be sort of relative, I can speak in absolute dogmatic terms, which I guess I should, but I won't. I was going to say there has to be a kind of originality of thought which is all but impossible. So let's back up the other way, again where I was, and to point out, if you're operating consciously, which is the only thing of interest to humans, or should be, and this level, just where you are right now, what your thinking is unattended. You pay no attention to it. Thinking about it doesn't count. But you're paying no attention, such as trying to interrupt it, trying to attend, trying to observe your own consciousness. If you're not doing that, then you are not thinking. You are withdrawing continually from this cloud bank. You think, and you only, and many times you inhale it less than you would the physical intake of oxygen to live. Just notice, at any rate, you take in a little bit, then you spew it back out. You redeposit it in some form. And that part's of no great interest, but that is what seems to be the intellectual dialogue. That seems to be the kind of mental heartbeat that goes on amongst ordinary humans, the kind of raging debates between Catholics and Protestants and Arabs and Jews and the Northerns, and between everybody. That, well, let's discuss this matter. If we discuss it, surely both of us, of decent people, of good heart, good intentions, reasonable intelligence, if we discuss the conflict between us, or the question between our religion or nationality or whatever, if we discuss it like rational people, we'll arrive to some new truth. It's that illusion that keeps them doing that, by the way. Because people have been saying that for 5,000 years. And you have just as many people, as you know, this is not about to be an attack, but we have just as many people now killing people over so-called ideas. That is religion, culture, nationality. We have just as many people being killed today. We've got more, actually, but I didn't want to give you the blues. We got just as many as you did 5,000 years ago when people first said, wait a minute, we got to stop killing each other because you worship trees and we worship mushrooms. You know, we got to find some common ground here and quit doing it. No, yes, we're true. You know things hadn't changed. The descriptions changed. And people cannot figure out why. They would hear that as being an attack on the stupidity of man. It's not an attack on the stupidity of man. I'm talking to you people. It's an attack, if anything, of you not realizing that it's all of no consequence, that there is nothing personal involved. I know that personal people get killed, and somebody gets shot, that a Muslim jumps up to a Jew and says, you're Jewish, so bang. Now the guy that got shot takes it personally, physically. But to call the idea, to stand aside from it and look at it as being a theoretical, an intellectual problem, that all these conflicting parties must get together and must come up with some kind of original, creative thinking about this matter so that they can come together and stop the conflict. Right. Sure. There's no problem. It'll be any day now. Right. According to how your watch runs. If you call any day 5,000 years, it is not going to happen because they're looking in the wrong place. If indeed they were individually trying to look at it. It's because what's going on is not being driven by the people involved. Never has been. It's still not being. It is certainly not being driven. If you looked upon conflicts, as it's been done in the past, not in an invalid matter either, and it's still somewhat true, but to look upon conflicts over people saying that they're in conflict over a religion, it's been pointed out many years ago that somebody would suspect hearing there that, wait a minute, they're not fighting over religion, they're fighting over territory. They're fighting over which lion pissed on this part of the mountains first, and he's defending it, but they're calling it something else. There is still that validity because you're never separate from the drive for the body to survive, to expand its territory, to be in charge. That's always there. But now it is considered more and more, as it would be predictable and expected, that they see less and less that we're actually fighting over territory. That's very seldom taken into account now. I mean, they will in passing. Wherever they're fighting now, certain groups of people, some of the old national states in the last 50 years that were put together after World War II, and they began to fall apart, and some of the factions in there that identify themselves as one religion or one ethnic group, and they're fighting another, they will say that they're literally fighting that we won't push these intruders out because this property here on this valley was ours. Now, I understand that. But they carry it further, you understand. That's what I want you to see. They don't say, well, we're just pushing them out because they want their property. That won't, you can't hardly get by with that in the civilized world anymore. Of course, that gets interesting because you physically, literally can, but you understand now even the grossest, the most barbaric of semi-civilized cultures and nations now they can no longer admit it. They will no longer say that. If they're there actually trying to fight and push out some group, some ethnic group, some religious group, out and say, get away from here. We're going, we'll kill you, we get out of here. If you say, well, all you're trying to do is take their property. Nowadays they will say, no, that's not it. They could stay here with us if they would only convert to our religion, if they were only more like us, if they didn't have such strange cultural ideas, if they didn't like polka music instead of yodeling like God intended, we'd let them live here. But they will not in the civilized world. They cannot. I don't mean it's a ploy. They simply cannot. If you say, well, you want their property, don't give me this bullshit about that they're the wrong religion. You want their property. That's just an excuse. No, you don't understand. It is now, as far as ordinary consciousness can perceive it, that the world, even in conflict and even in warfare, in terms of warfare, is being driven by ideas, by thinking, not by simple desire for physical conquest or the physical occupation of someone else's property, and etc. The only way that anyone would see past that, what I was getting at, was if we called into play the need for some originality of thought, some creativity, which I said is damn near impossible to describe. So, but if we back up in the other direction and say, well, everything that you think now is being taken out of this common thinking cloud. If you begin to see that, or if you just accept it as the truth now for the sake of my harangue, then you would consider then anything that's normally thought is not in any way personal, individual, original, or creative. It simply is not. What passes for creativity amongst or at the ordinary level of unattended consciousness is simply drawing wings on pigs, putting hooves on eagles. And you say, well, that's something new. Or Jews began to observe Mass. Think so, well, this is a brand new idea, new breakthrough. But all it is you're still extracting that which has already been pre-deposited in the thinking cloud. That's the closest it comes to creativity, which is not. Why is it that men cannot think creatively? That you could not be original? Whatever originality I thought would be, which is impossible to describe in words, but whatever it would be, what I want you to see and why these certain questions cannot be answered. They can't even be posited correctly, but they cannot certainly be answered, is that anything, since it would take creativity, some originality of thought, is that originality of thought, whatever that might be, is intolerable at the ordinary level of consciousness around this planet. Is intolerable in that it does not contribute to the routine continuity of collective thinking. And that cannot be tolerated. I mean, one person can do it, but you're simply drowned it out. One voice, let's say that one person could actually do this. It's like saying one person in some particular time and place is actually more conscious to the point to say that they're more conscious, so that we could say it. And he tried to say something, he or she, and literally tried to say something. It's always a simple mathematical conclusion to draw or to see. You got one voice, and then you have 6 billion other voices, and then subtract that one without me having to go 5 billion, 900 million, and all that. It's you against 6 billion if you tried it. You're faced with the same thing when you try and be more conscious, when you try and look out at life and go, what in the hell is going on? Why does it not make any sense? Why do people who seem to be in charge, people who seem to be intelligent, turn around and step on their own dick, shoot themselves in the foot, stick themselves in the eye, say, here, listen to me, and then bite their own tongue off? Why does life seem to be carried more or less on the back of Captain Irony, if not Professor Sarcasm? You know, what is this insanity? It's not insanity. You cannot think at the unattended level of consciousness. You cannot think anything original at that level because it does not support, it does not contribute to, it is not an operational part of the routine continuity necessary. Everyone knows what continuity means. Things are going in a certain way. It's normally used, of course, in specific instances. If there's a continuity to a dance or to an opera or to a musical program or to a book, a novel. There's continuity now in science, they use it. But it's that one thing gets going, they say, well, here's an opera, and it's set in the 17th century, and it's done in the classical tradition. And you expect, if you paid your money or came there to see it, that in the middle of it, they're not going to go from classical ballet into modern dance, or it's not going to shift over from a romantic Tchaikovsky-sounding score into suddenly Schoenberg and people trying to dance to 12-tone music. There's a continuity. There is what appears to be sequence to it, that one thing seems to naturally flow from one thing to another, that it all from a quite crude sense, but a collective sense, that you look out at the specifics. Remember, it's only specifics that people ever use the term continuity. But that you look out at the specific example, and one thing seems to rationally, naturally, predictably, comfortably flow one thing to another. It is sanity from the ordinary view. It is predictability, but it is sanity, is what it amounts to mentally. That I can make crude examples if you hadn't already yourself, but if you walked into Mass, and the priest got up there and he started whatever they do, and he started holding up, and suddenly he pulled up his things and began to do a tap dance, and began to sing something. That's not just to be silly. You understand, that kind of thing, you could say literally could happen, but you understand, almost literally it cannot. I keep throwing those kind of things to you, and keep trusting that you see more than some sort of non sequitur based humor in that. It'll always make you laugh, but you also ask, why do I laugh at such as that? It is non-sequential. It is a break in the continuity, and it cannot happen, and therefore you can laugh about it. It's simply a picture I made up. But you know, and think about that, why is it? A priest somewhere could literally be there in the middle, for who knows why. Well, I got to stop if I'm going to tell the truth. It could happen to a guy that flipped his lid, as we call it in psychiatry. But insofar as a priest who was still at the ordinary level of consciousness, that was still within his Roman Catholic wits, you do understand it's impossible. Think about it. But rhetorically, you should be asking, why? But you understand, literally, here could be a priest. Now, not suddenly went crazy from drinking or drugs or something, or suddenly had a mini stroke, but it's actually staying there doing the same service, the Mass, and everybody's there, and he suddenly thinks, why not? I've been practicing. He's been taking tap lessons on the side, or and he decides, why not? And he pulls them up and do. All right. Why is it that can't happen? When literally, what I just said is not true, because literally somewhere a priest, now remember, he's got to still be in the mainstream of thought. He's still got to be withdrawing from the ordinary mental cloud. He can't be going crazy. His nervous system cannot be falling apart, having a stroke. But why is it that he cannot decide, well, I'm just going to stop and tap dance? I'm going to stop in the middle of Mass and say, did you hear the one about a priest, a rabbi, and a donkey was... And you go, well, he could. No, he couldn't. And you should ask yourself, why? It's right at the heart of what's the purpose of life. Other people would think, well, you're just bringing up some question about why does humor work under certain conditions and certain not. No, you're getting close to the kind of question that people can't answer. You're getting closer to, in a sense, the answer to consider that than people do to think, is there a God? And then try to think, well, can it be proven? They'd be better off thinking, how come a priest, how come a rabbi cannot suddenly go into a tap dance, suddenly put on a propeller beanie and start telling jokes, or play his banjo and begin to play, and you say, well, he could. Yeah, but he can't. Why? Well, it is the continuity. It is the routine continuity that is sanity. It is the unattended, it is the natural, normal level of human consciousness. Now, I said it was specific. It's why I tried to pull out an example of the ballet. I assume you got it, but or the church service. There's a continuity. You go in there, and if whatever the service is, a Jewish service, or Protestant, whatever it is, if you go in there, it has some sort of beginning, if you know anything about it. It has something, and it goes through, and there's nothing unexpected happens. If it did, then the whole thing is blown. It is no longer what you perceived it to be. It's no longer the ballet. It's no longer a church service. It is, if it actually could happen, it would strike the people there in the big old fear spot in their heart, as poets used to like to say. It would scare the bejesus out of people, even Muslims and Buddhists. That it would just be almost unbearable that you were there taking it seriously, and in the middle the guy began to do a tap dance and play a banjo. It'd be more frightening than hearing bombs drop or gunshots in the street. There's a continuity, and you understand that if you could think outside of what you normally draw out of that cloud, if there whatever would be individual thought on your part of actually looking upon life, not something crazy, and you could look out and begin to think about anything, it would interfere with the continuity. But notice the distinction I was drawing between individual examples also. Men have never, and it's almost impossible if you do it now, but to look upon life, no quotation marks, no nothing, life, no conditions, look upon life as having a continuity to it. Once you understand what I mean by continuity, take it out of specific examples. And a man's mind might be able to sit there and come up with 100 examples, 1,000 examples of where continuity, and him go, yes, 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 and keep listening to them, and he might get up to 10,000, let's just say. And if I said, well, all right, you're doing good. You see that everything that goes on in life that has any longevity, that seems to be an integral part of human life, human existence, has a continuity to it, a kind of predictability, but continuity. It's not just predictable, it's the continuity that all seems to be flowing in a acceptable, comfortable, rational, perceivable manner. Damn near organic, that just naturally flows. And I could say to this person, well, you've picked out 10,000, all the way from art to soapbox racing to professional wrestling to flower growing to cooking. He goes, yes, I see it all. And I go, all right, save yourself some time. You could keep this up down there to infinity. Let me save you a little time. You've had all this practice of thinking of these 10,000. Its life has a continuity to it. Then the mind would go, because it tries to look out and it cannot see the whole picture. All it can see is what it can draw out of this thinking cloud. And he can do it piece at a time. He could continue. He might list finally 20,000 examples of where continuity is an absolute, inescapable, integral part of whatever the activity is. That yes, I see it, continuity is, without it, this would cease. Art would cease, religion would cease. Love, romantic love, he could begin to list all these things that there was not a continuity to it, that men felt, that men perceived. It would cease to exist. He could go on almost to infinity. You understand? What I'm saying is he could almost get to the point of encompassing all of life. But he will always be at least point something or other short. And I'm just being charitable for the sake of theoretical discussion. You will always be at least point something, 0.5 short. You'll never get to 100%. And if I told him, look, you're so close, you have gone through the dictionary. You have gone through encyclopedias and you have looked at almost everything that's listed as a human endeavor, a human activity, a field of human interest. As far as I can tell, you have listed every damn one of them, and he says yes, and I go, and you see that continuity is an inseparable, the de rigueur part of each one of them. He goes, yes. And I'd say, you still know you hadn't got them all? And he'd go, yeah, I get that feeling, but I don't know what else to do. And I said, all right, save yourself some time, stand back from this list of 40,000, a million, and look at life as having a continuity to it. That's when dear old thinking goes pop. Because it requires more than this, but if one simple description is, it would require for you to see life that you be able, an individual, to be able to pluck out of the thinking cloud everything in there at one time. You would have to inhale the whole cloud momentarily. That is, everything that anybody is ever going to think. Or for those of you that like the easy version, everything that everyone's already thought. Which there's a real big distinction. Not. But you would have to inhale that complete cloud of every possible ordinary thinking or thought. You would have to inhale it at that one time. Is the only way you can see life at that level, and you cannot do it. Which is why people cannot wake up, or you cannot be more conscious just by going, well, by God, I'll think about it. I mean, I'm serious. I'm going to sit down and think about it. Which I can refer you again to use him as a good old Buddha story. He sat down after all this under a tree and went, screw the rest of this stuff. I'm going crazy. I'm not moving until I get it. And they keep playing. I noticed variations. I could be making this up, but it sounds good. I noticed they do variations when they translate it from Pali into French and Italian and English, that sometimes they have Buddha saying, I'm going to sit here and think about it until I become enlightened. Other versions say, I'm going to sit here and ponder it, and some just says that, he said, I'm going to sit here and not move until I reach enlightenment. I could be making all that up, but you understand that still represents something. That it would be the difference in someone understanding that I can sit here and think about it forever, and a good fat a lot of what'll do me. That was Buddhist talk again. That I can sit here and think about this forever, and I've already thought about it forever. I've thought about it for 30 years trying to reach a state of enlightenment, and he suddenly realized it's not going anywhere. Nobody ever describes it in that way, but what he meant was, I have thought out. I have thought everything possible to think. I have thought every permeation. I have thought every variation. I have thought every possible combination. I have thought, and ugh. And it suddenly struck him that it has gotten me no closer. Now, that's one individual who's looked at, and the same with Jesus, Muhammad, and everyone else. But that's one individual who is now looked upon as being some sort of beacon of consciousness, some shining light of the development of man. He said, he realized, I have taken everything possible out of that cloud. I have thought now for 35 years, plus all the physical rigors and tortures he put himself through. He got past that quickly, but he understood the rest of this, and me trying to figure it out. I have thought everything possible for a man to think. I am now like a walking compendium of all thoughts that I have extracted every possible thought from that cloud, twisted it, turned it, and I have not changed one bit. The reason that thinking will not, that is, that you cannot be original, which would be the only way that thinking could make you more conscious, is you cannot be creative because the cloud, life itself, will not tolerate it. Because it does not contribute to the continuity. It is an interruption. It is an anomaly to the continuity. And you're just going to have to deal with it yourself as to what would that be. It would have to be non-insane. It would have to still be in the mainstream. It would have to be coming from the cloud, the thinking cloud. It would have to be some combination in there of thinking, of words, neural spurts, that made sense to the cloud. It cannot be insanity. It cannot be simply non sequiturs for the sake of non sequitarianism. It would have to be creative thought using the materials already there, but you cannot do that. Because if you could, it would break the continuity of life. It would break the continuity of the cloud. It would break the routine continuity that is the collective consciousness of man, the common consciousness of man. Now, having said that, for one individual, since it's you among 6 billion, one person, that's not true, which is the only reason that a Buddha or Jesus or Moses or Confucius or Lao or Zoroaster, it's the only reason you can do it. But once you see this, it takes, if I may say so in a quite momentarily religious manner, it takes a hell of a load off your shoulders It takes a hell of a load, better yet, off your mind. That you realize there is not one thing that you have ever thought that brought you any closer. And you always thought otherwise, because you thought, well, sometimes I'm thinking good, inspiring, metaphysical type thoughts. And of course, other times I'm thinking real crude, harsh, aggressive thoughts. And of course, the former are much better. And that seems a quite tenable, unassailable position. Unless you're somebody like Buddha, that kind of potential, and you could ask yourself, or I could ask you, well, okay, you're right, the good, charitable, decent, transcendental kind of thinking, you say that's got to be better for you, or more progressive, or more conducive to a higher state of consciousness that does greedy, crude, lustful, aggressive thoughts. He goes, yes. That's what's known as setting yourself up if you know how to do it. And you think, well, if that be true, you have applied yourself of late or throughout your adult life of trying to deal mostly with the former, have you not? The man says, certainly I have. Of course, he was really good, but now he'd know where this was going. And I wouldn't have to say, well, since there's no doubt that that does, could you in just some way give me an indication of how far along in this movement from Paris to Istanbul to a state of higher consciousness, just how far has that moved you along? And he would suddenly, as Zoroaster once did, go, oy vey, for the second time, nowhere. It has made no difference whatsoever. And yet at the ordinary level at which people do think and discuss matters, it cannot be true. But you could look at that as it be the break of Saul coming over the horizon just before daybreak actually starts, as you realize everything I have thought up until now, as much fun as it was and kept me alive, has meant nothing. And it's like just, it's a pre-echo to awakening. Or as I said, it would be like if it was a Jesus or Moses or somebody worth his salt, if I'd asked just a few questions, he would know where it was headed. That is it not better for a person to read holy materials? Is it not better for a man to walk in the shadows, to seek the company of wise men, spiritual men, than it is Philistines and thieves and drunkards, to entertain those higher thoughts, to pursue them, as opposed to just common, mundane thinking? And they would all go, yes. And I'd say, and there's no doubt, I'd assume that you have really applied yourself as much as humanly possible to the former at the expense of the latter. And everyone said, well, certainly, yes. And if you had any deserving of a greater name, that's when it should hit you like, even if I'm telling the truth, even if I have pursued all this great stuff, I mean, just what small measurement can I give that I am now, by such activities, how much closer am I to understanding the nature of life? How much different am I internally? How much of I can tell I have moved my awareness, my consciousness, my understanding of life? And he would immediately answer, you mean besides none? That within itself, you could look at, as I said, as maybe a small awakening. To at least realize, well, by God, I've wasted my whole life. You know, I mean, at least we don't thank God for little small encouragements. Most people get on their deathbed if they're still coherent at all, and they're laying there dying their final breath. Is usually when all these intelligent people, at least apocryphalical, they're giving credit for all these great insightful statements with their final breath of going things like millionaires, people prizes, recognized thinkers and artists, and it's like their dying breath, they go, Jesus, I pissed away my whole life. People love to hear that because it seems to be at least two things. At the obvious level, it seems to be an additional show of how wise they were, which you can't think about it, folks. But it is. I'm not making that up. You can look it up. There are whole books of famous last words of people. And such collections are always replete with these people. They'll pick out a Goethe or somebody, Descartes, and they'll say, some great thinker on his deathbed. There's pretty good evidence. His doctor was there, his sister-in-law or somebody, and says at the final moments, just before he went, I've wasted my entire life. And it's taken as words of wisdom. Think about that a minute. That here's a man that is now historically considered to be one of the great thinkers. And it's not just thinkers, there's plenty of religious figures, if you don't know. Great popes, great theologians. They're looked at now as being beacons of inspiration, spiritual enlightenment. And their final words, they'll admit it. They'll put it right there in the book. His final words was, I've wasted my whole life. Wow. That's taken as words of wisdom. And the person is now honored. There's a second reason that people like it. That one I won't go into because it's too obvious. Well, everybody likes a dead man. But there's a better way of putting that. I'll leave it up to you. So in any collective manner, men cannot be creative. There's no such thing as some pocket, some school of original thought. In the same way, there's no such thing as organizations actually engaged in the process of enlightenment. We all know there are plenty who say they are, but there are no such groups. There are no such organizations. They are, but they're not. Because life will not tolerate, literally will not tolerate anything that's breaking up the continuity. Anything that interferes with the parade will be stepped on if it just pops up. The only saving grace, which those of you who are not Catholic, she was a very dear nun who died some 300 years ago now. But at any rate, the saving grace, maybe it was a Baptist nun, but I see that's not going to help the humor, so as we say in the theologian business, screw it. The saving grace is that individually you can do it and life does not care. And then having said that you can do it, then you're faced with the thing of trying to attend to your own consciousness and go, well, you're right. Every time I do it, I can't see life does not simply slap me around. Anytime I can interrupt thought and be aware of my own consciousness, I never have friends, family, strangers to stop and go, what are you doing? Nothing bad has ever happened. I've not had little strokes. My heart didn't feel like it was about to fall out. Nothing terrible has happened when I've done that. So in that sense, it's obvious that life doesn't care whether I do it or not, which you could say is the good news. The bad news is you think, well, all that being true, how come it is that it's almost impossible for me to do it? It's because of the continuity. That a person can reach the point that they know exactly what's involved with this, even if they don't know where it's going, which you don't. You only imagine, well, if I could actually become attentive to my own consciousness instead of me thinking what comes naturally out of this cloud, out of this continuity of a collective atmosphere. That if right now I can still be conscious, I can even talk, or at least start off easy, you can sit there and be conscious. And I can quit withdrawing from that collective thinking cloud, and I get a taste of something else. And I tell you that you're correctly getting the taste of something else. If you need any encouragement, you just know this is another state of consciousness. It's unaided. It is not brought about by drugs. It's not brought about by belief in some external God or supreme force. I personally, there's nobody else to give credit or blame to, that I personally can right now, I can do that. And it either strikes you when you do it some number of times, it either strikes you that, yes, this is the way. This is going somewhere toward Istanbul. Whatever the hell it looks like, I don't know. But yes, this is it. This is the one thing that I know I can do. This is the one thing that when I do it, I understand that if I didn't do it right now, if I was not Edgar Winter, I'd be the Temptations. I wouldn't have to show up. Because you don't have to show up to think out of the cloud. That's how you can get by with it. That's how you can think without knowing what you're going to think next. That's how you can talk and got no idea what your mouth's about to say. And of course, ordinarily you'd think, well, my mouth only says what my brain tells it to. I mean, any high school biology book will tell you that. Case closed, good. Because you don't think, well, wait a minute. My mouth only says what my brain tells it to say. Yes, that's it. Let's go. Wait a minute. then who tells your brain what to think? I gotta hear that. Nobody. Of course, ordinary mind will not even tolerate that, but there it is. You're not thinking. The thinking cloud is thinking. And you breathe in, you're still alive, and you make continual, unattended, unknowing, unselective withdrawals from it. Somebody turns around to you and says, "Are you Italian?" And you respond, whatever way is appropriate. Somebody says, "Didn't you used to live in Omaha?" You don't have to think about it. An ordinary person says, "Well, yeah, you do. You won't tell the truth." But you didn't stop and think, well, will I tell this person the truth? Will I lie to him? I actually lived in Lincoln, Nebraska, not Omaha. Should I lie to them? You got no choice. You're alive. You go, well, blah, 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 blah. And you ask yourself, why did I do that? How did I do that? And as always, the ordinary mind has every way in the world out. Well, I only told the truth. Yeah, but did you plan to tell the truth? Well, I always try to tell the truth. But when the person said, "Hey, aren't you Italian and from Omaha?" You went, "Well, yeah." How did you know to say that? Well, because it's true. But when they asked you the question, you thought, well, let's see. I like to tell the truth. I am Italian. I'm from Omaha, so I'll tell my tongue to respond in the affirmative. That's what you did, right? An ordinary person, of course, will go, well, sure. It's enough to wear you out if you're trying to do this and you still got that ordinary person in you. Is that